Welcome to the Militia Gaming community. I'm Trigger, and today we find out which of the forced induction options is the best for your builds. Let's go. Alright, real quick before I get into the video, I just want to say if you're looking for any of my builds, you can head to the website. It's militiagamingco.com, and you can click on either Need for Speed Heat or Need for Speed Unbound. I have builds for both, and that should take you to my spreadsheets. I put all of my testing data in there, so if you have any questions about that stuff, you can also send me a DM. My DMs are always open for everybody, and I read every single message. Alright, let's get into this. So I feel like it's important to talk about my testing method to show my work, so to speak. So here's how all of this went down. The only way to test without letting the driver error in as a variable is to run as straight of a line as possible with no NOS and a limited amount of steering. I feel like the location I chose gave me a long enough road to get the S Plus car up to 200 miles per hour. Now, I really would have liked to have gotten that S Plus car to top speed, but there's just nowhere on the map to do that without having to dodge a bunch of traffic or take high-speed highway turns. I'm not saying I can't get to top speed anywhere, just that the road to top speed would be different for each of the tests, and thus making those tests null. I also only tested the elite version of each of these forced induction options. The first car was the BMW M4 GTS, which I already had built for A+. I then just swapped out that part for each forced induction option on the elite tier for each test. What I was looking for was where in this speed range was each of those options strongest. There's a lot you can do with that type of information. For example, if the screw supercharger is really strong early in the speed range, but really weak at the higher speeds, you could theoretically save your NOS for the higher speeds and run faster times overall. Now, because I only tested the elite versions of these parts, I really can't make any broad claims like saying one specific option is better across all levels. I really can't even say that this will translate to all cars because I really only tested this on 2 different builds. I believe it will be, but the reality is that each engine could perform differently with each of these options. Each car and each gearbox could perform differently as well. So that being said, I can confirm the results for these specific cars, and I will say that I believe this information will translate to other cars because the 2 cars I tested have completely different builds, different engines, different gearboxes, and obviously they are completely different cars in different tiers. So with that, I was able to show a couple of patterns. So let's get into these results. The first one is, like I said earlier, the M4 GTS, which is an A+ build, but then when I put the elite option into the car, it jumps up into S. Here are the results for the first to 60, first to 100 miles per hour, first to 150 miles per hour, first to top speed, aka when the car bounces off the rev limiter, and first to cross this line right here, which I'm considering my finish line. As you can see, the screw supercharger is the fastest option at every point during this car's speed range, which is quite weird because it's supposed to be really good early and then really bad late, but it's strong all the way through. The other takeaway is that the Roots holds down the second position in every single test except for the first to top speed. But that's a little bit misleading because it actually had the highest top speed out of all the options. So of course it will take longer to get there because it has an extra mile per hour or 2 to climb. The last takeaway is that the centrifugal supercharger performed the worst in all points of the speed range, at low speeds, medium speeds, and top speeds, and it was the last option to reach its top speed. It's fair to say that the centrifugal is certainly the worst option for this build. But let's move on to the S Plus build. For this one, I used a car I had already built for S Plus, the 488 GTB. I ran the same exact tests I did with the M4 in the same exact location, and here were the results. The main takeaway is that the screw supercharger once again performed better in all areas. It was the first to do everything, And being that this build is completely different than the M4 build, I think it's fair to say it's probably the best option in most situations. Obviously, if you need to drop your PI rating so your build fits into a certain class, then you would go with a different option. But if you're building an S+ build and the PI rating is not really of your concerns, then the Screw Supercharger seems like it's the one to go with for sure. Another takeaway is that once again, the Centrifugal Supercharger performed the worst in every single test. So it's pretty safe to say in general, it's the worst performing option of the bunch. The Roots Supercharger was very consistent from 0 to 150 miles per hour. It was second place in each of those tests for both cars, but then fell to fourth place when accelerating from 150 to 200. That's where the turbos took over, which I think is probably pretty accurate when you compare that to real life. The other thing I noticed is that the dual turbo outperforms the single in nearly every single test. It leads me to believe that the single turbo is literally only good for ultra top end acceleration, you know, from like 200 miles per hour and up. Unfortunately, I didn't get to test that specifically because of the things I mentioned earlier. Alright, so to just briefly summarize my main takeaways, the Screw Supercharger was the best at every single test, the Roots Supercharger was second at nearly every test, and the Centrifugal was absolutely doo-doo at every single test and shouldn't be used unless you have to squeeze your build into a specific tier. Alright, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Shout out to all the Heat 5 members. I will catch you on the next one. Trigger out.